Hey, what's going on, 499 fans? It's your boy Music Nerd, and this is a mini podcast with your boy Music Nerd. Let's get to it. Hey, what's going on, 499 fans? It's your boy Music Nerd, and this is about to be a mini podcast with Music Nerd. I know we usually do this to do in a minute, but this is going to be a little bit longer. I am actually going to go into Miami's playoff chances and really just talking about kind of a recap of the season and what we're talking about here. We'll be doing another big podcast after everything is announced and everything is set for the postseason as well, or if by some miracle Miami gets put into the ACC championship, which is very unlikely. Depending on what happens tonight, we will see. But yes, I will be posting this before the rankings are revealed for championship week tonight, so then kind of take of it as you will. But I actually wrote this one out, so this is a little bit different than what we usually do. I do write them out. Usually, I am this kind of script writer for so off on the ninth, but I don't write the points that we usually make. I write the topics that we do, and I let our contributors or collaborators, like everybody else, like Jay, Ajak, Nick, and Josh, I let them kind of do what they want. They can make points if they want, but usually it's more so they do their research and they come in, we have a conversation. This is more pointed out. That's why it's kind of a mini podcast with me. So, get into it. Hurricane playoff chances. All right. I'm going to talk more so about Miami and what's going on and what's happened this season. But first thing is first, my fans may not want to hear this, but when it comes to playoff chances, like I said, first thing first, Miami, the first finger we need to point is at ourselves. Yes, when it comes to our issues, it's admittedly Miami. We lost two games that we should not have, one at home, another on the road. That being said, that's kind of BS as well. Yeah, that's right. It's bullshit. You notice I didn't say, like a lot of pundits are saying nowadays, that Miami has no one to blame but themselves. That's just not true. Miami has a lot of people to blame. And the first person I'm going to blame here, besides Miami itself, like I said, not least of all, like I said, is going to be the committee. The committee grossly underrated Miami to begin this. Now, let's get this straight. Let's take us back to when the first rankings came out. Miami had just played probably his worst game of the season, arguably. I mean, I think the offense played its worst game of the season, even though it didn't turn the ball nearly as much as against Louisville. It was just stagnant, stale. It was a very disappointing game to watch. I think the fact of the matter is, it just you could tell, like looking at the product on the field, Miami was a lot better than SMU. And that was just very clear by the way the game was played. But also, Miami was a lot better, in my opinion, than Louisville. But both these teams had good game plans, and both these teams had good coaches. And I will get back into that a little bit later. But you go back November 1st, probably the most stagnant performance of the year. Miami played tight. CJ Daniels didn't play, which really hurt as well. I'll also get into that a little bit as well. But you could just tell like Miami was just trying to hold them. They were trying their best not to lose, and they weren't playing to win. I felt, and so that's probably not the best impression that you want to put on this committee. Thus, this committee grossly underrated Miami and put them at 18. Now, I'm gonna be clear. Miami has never been the number 18 team in this country. Not even after that game was Miami the number 18 team in the country. And I know that there's an AP poller I think out there who put Miami at number 17. I don't see how anyone has watched the last month of football and think that Miami is anywhere near the number 17 team in the country, but I digress from that. The eye test alone shows that Miami has always been a top 15, if not a top 10 team this year. Now, you have to have consequences for losses, especially teams that you should not lose to, like in SMU. As talented as I think they are, and as well coached as I think they are, SMU is not a team Miami should not have lost to. Miami is better. But that being said, the committee is supposed to look at your whole body of work. That is the whole point of the committee. The committee is not really supposed to be on the same par, and they really have the same job that AP poll or even a coaches poll has. They judge you from week to week. That is really the design of it. Thus, it even gets to the point where it's kind of like with it being where you have to have a preseason poll. Sometimes it can be unrealistic because it's ranking teams on things that they have done from either last year or changes that they've made to teams that they think is going to happen, or the portal rankings or something like that, or basing it on just a quarterback who had some hype, i.e., Florida being ranked in the top 10 in the beginning of the season. but we didn't think it was going to go this bad for them. But obviously, you get my point. Now, the committee has 2 months of college football to review and to rank. And while I thought Miami was not going to be ranked as high as I felt that they deserved to be that night, when I saw 18 on that ranking, I was like, I like deflated. I was at work, I think that time. I was actually helping somebody with a frustration situation, and I sucked my teeth out loud. And she was like, "You okay?" I was like, "Oh, I'm fine. No, we'll get this done." Got it done. Looked at it again. Then I saw the teams that were ranked ahead of it. I had no problem with Louisville, Georgia Tech, and Virginia being ranked ahead of Miami. What I had a problem with was teams like Utah, Notre Dame, and other teams like that who had 2 losses being ranked so far ahead of Miami and the other ACC teams. It looked to me like you could just see it right then, and I will get to this later as well, that there was a big bias against the ACC teams. And then you hear the commissioner say, "Oh, we just haven't liked what we've seen from Miami lately," which I have to give credence to that. Miami at that point had lost 2 of the last 3 games, but also at the same time, the losses aren't supposed to matter when they happen. You're supposed to look at the entire season. 18 was too low of a ranking. And I have to think if I'm being clear, I think like Utah was ranked, if I'm not mistaken, Utah was ranked 12th at that point, and they had just got boat raced at that time by BYU. So did you not like what they had seen either? But they also had 2 losses. And then there was another thing that bothered me, and we will get to this later as well, and we'll go up with this. For me, I was thinking about the head-to-head. I was like, well, Miami will be closer to Notre Dame because of this. Every other head-to-head that had happened at that point was taken into consideration except Miami and Notre Dame's. And that was just the beginning. Now, we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah. So, for me, having a 2-loss team like Miami being ranked at 18 after they just lost to SMU was just laughable to me, especially when you had another 2-loss team in Notre Dame already in your top 10. It was just like then they were giving themselves an excuse to keep these teams far apart. So let's get into the second person. The third entity I can blame. So Miami, to a lesser extent, can blame the refs. Now, I'll say this: the entire season has not been great for ACC officiating at all, and Miami, until maybe this last stretch, these last 4 weeks, cannot be described, accused, or masquerade as a disciplined team. I think one of the big things in the SMU game was pre-snap penalties and offsides and false starts and everything like that. But when you go back and you watch the SMU and the LSU games, those were not officiated well at all. At all. Even so much to the point where broadcast teams, which are usually very neutral or very pro whoever Miami is playing, especially the last month, it's kind of been really bad. But, that's another podcast another time. Maybe we'll discuss that next week when all the rest of the boys are here. But they were saying things like, "I don't see how you can make that call. That wasn't a hold." When Francis Malinois brought somebody down from Louisville, that wasn't a hold. That was definitely just, it was a one-on-one. Malinois won, but somehow it was a hold. This was definitely pass interference on the interception that Beck threw. The first interception that Malachi Tony threw, there was definitely pass interference on that, but wasn't called. Then again, hey, it is what it is. You can't throw 4 interceptions and expect to win a game. You can get that. But then you get into the game when you get to that punt return, and he's like going forward to catch it, and he does not make a fair catch on him. He makes this symbol, which means nothing. That means nothing. That means get away. So he goes up and gets it. He starts to return it. Gets called for a penalty for a false catch, which is never called against anybody. And even you have the announcer saying it's like, "Yo, that's not called against anyone." He probably would have scored had it been let it go. And we kind of see that with what happened the previous week at Stanford, where he had over 100 yards of punt returns, and what he's happened in the rest of the season. Yeah, he probably would have returned that for a touchdown, and had a big punt return against SMU next week too. So then you have that, and then let's get to the SMU game, which is probably the 2 biggest non-calls of the season. Because now they have Miami in this predicament, and I'll get to the most egregious one in a minute. But really, when it comes down to it, that deep ball to Keelan Marion on 3rd and 8, when Miami had the ball at the 50-yard line with about 2 minutes to go against SMU, Carson Beck actually puts out a pretty good ball, but the defensive back definitely interferes with Keelan Marion. and it's not called. It's right in front of the referee. It's definitely pass interference. Literally, the flag was thrown and picked back up, and they said it wasn't a pass interference. The ball was catchable. Everything that was there, they picked it up. I'd never seen anything like that, and I have to think that if it was on the other side, Miami would have been called of it, and that kind of gets confirmed because the next series on a fourth down, where SMU was trying to call a timeout, or no, they stopped the play for a fault. They stopped the play for a flag on SMU. The play is going. The quarterback is going. The quarterback is running and everything like that. No, everyone is going. Every single person is going, and everything. So Bane, I guess, kind of stops up when he because Bane stops up because he sees the referee put his hands up. It's like, hey, stop. Lightfoot doesn't see this. And I think that's one thing that Roddy Jones never understood because Roddy Jones was constantly saying, oh, he stopped up, he stopped up, he stopped up. Lightfoot doesn't have the benefit of being on Bane's side. He's coming from the opposite side rushing. And so on that fourth down play, they run into the quarterback, and Lightfoot kind of still hits Kevin Jennings because he thinks the play is still live, and he thinks that this is a play for the season. It was, at that point, the biggest play of the season. Miami needed to win this game for it to go on and do what it needed to do. But because he didn't see what was going on, because he didn't see that this play was stopped, he runs into him and gets a unnecessary roughness call that continues that drive. Now, people say, oh, Miami still could have done this, Miami still could have done that. That drive, that penalty really put SMU into field goal range, and that's all it needed to do. And it kind of, you can see, it kind of sucked the life out of everybody. Now, you can also say Carson Beck should not have thrown an interception in the red zone, and you're absolutely right. Malachi Coney did something that he should not have done. He instead of going with the route he usually does, he tried to diff back and go into the end zone. But also, too, that brings in the fact that C.J. Daniels didn't play that game. At that point in the season, C.J. Daniels had been the best red zone receiver for us because of his route running and because of his savvy and because of his connection in the red zone with Carson Beck. But also, when it comes down to it, Miami went super soft in that game because they saw how the game was being called officially, and they saw how anytime they tried to do something big, either got called back or they were making mistakes. So Miami went mad conservative in that game. Now, Miami still should have won this game. You never want to put it in the hands of the refs, but that is a big point that I think needs to be made. But really, when it comes down to it, if any one of those calls goes the other way, Miami wins either one of those games, which brings me to my next point. Miami doesn't have a bad loss. The biggest contention that Notre Dame fans have for Miami not being involved in the playoffs is that Miami has losses to two unranked teams, and Notre Dame's losses are to two highly ranked teams, which I'm going to point out the hypocrisy in that and irony in that a little bit. But you look at it, Miami lost to two teams that finished 8-4. Louisville actually ended the season missing Miller Moss, so actually their season can kind of be put into a nutshell too. The reason why they lost three of their last 4 games because Miller Moss did not play. So they absolutely boat raced Kentucky the other day so much that they actually finally fired Mark Stoops 41-0. So Louisville, top 35 FPI team, goes 8-4. Top 20 defensive team as well. One of the best teams in the nation. SMU, also a top 30 team, was ranked in this last CFP rankings. Unfortunately, lost to California on the road at night in a hostile environment. Sometimes you're not going to be able to do that, but let's analyze these two teams. One, both of these teams are well coached. Two of the best young coaches in the league. Jeff Brom at Louisville, who has never lost as a underdog to a top 5 team on the road or at home as a coach, has never lost, not once. So that's an interesting fact that I did not know until that night when he was playing the then number 2 Miami Hurricanes. But when I previewed it, and I don't know if y'all remember that I previewed it, I always said he was going to have a good game plan, and he did. Louisville is the only team that I can say this year came out and punched Miami in the mouth, in my opinion. And while Miami did answer, they kind of answered too late. Miami didn't, because of all the turnovers and all the interceptions that Carson Beck threw, Miami wasn't really able to really get a rhythm into the game. That being said, they had the ball, and we'll talk about this too. They had the ball down 3, a minute left, just made another mistake, and just made another interception and lost that game. Then you get to the SMU game. SMU has a homecoming game. They're bringing back all these good players. a heated atmosphere and everything like that. It's homecoming. They need this game because they just lost to actually a pretty solid Wake Forest team. They finished, if I'm not mistaken, 8-4 this year as well. So you're looking at this and you put it all to it. Now the reason why they used to call bad losses because these teams are unranked and Miami was double digit favorites. Now you can't lose these games, and that's what Mario has done when he's been to Miami. I think this is his sixth loss as a double digit favorite at Miami. Which you can't do that. I'm not gonna excuse that, and I've already said Miami should have won both these games. But at the same time, we cannot pretend like these teams are not talented teams. And by that logic, Notre Dame should not have lost the two games that they lost to too, because Notre Dame were actually pretty heavy favorites in both the games that they won too. Which brings me to my point: Notre Dame has no bad losses. That's why they're better. Every post I see has some type of Miami hater Notre Dame fan spewing that nonsense on the eye test, which admittedly, the eye test is a thing. But the thing is, too, about it, and this is ironic for me, because Booger McFarland, out of everyone, is saying that, and Booger McFarland has a mixed bag when it comes to being an analyst, but it's not a beauty pageant. It's not a beauty pageant, excuse me. And he is absolutely right. It's not. It's not a beauty pageant. It's about resume. It's about what happens on the field. It doesn't always have to be pretty, but it's about what happens on the field. It's not about how so much it looks. I will take Miami's ugly win against Notre Dame every night of the week instead of Notre Dame putting 70 on a Syracuse team that has absolutely given up. Or them putting 37 on a Pittsburgh team where Coach said literally earlier that week, it doesn't matter if we play in this game because as long as we win our next two ACC games, we'll be fine. That's literally what the man said going into what was, at that point, for him, was supposed to be the biggest game of the season with the highest ranked team that he's played at that point. You don't say that when the game matters. And that's another thing I think Notre Dame has got going for it because it doesn't have to play in a conference. The stakes for them are different. They literally had a 2-game season. They failed that 2-game season, but they're being rewarded because they're Notre Dame, and they won the rest of their games. So let's get down to it as well. I'm going to get into Notre Dame as well when it comes down to it. They were favorites against Miami, Texas A&M, like I said. You cannot say they weren't prepared for it. And there are a lot of people saying, "Oh, it shouldn't matter about that." It's about what's going on now. It's not about what happened the first 2 weeks of the season. So why even fucking play the first 2 weeks of the season? Why schedule those games then? If they don't matter, why do this? Because the thing is, I have a hard time believing that if if the roles were reversed, that Notre Dame would not be pounding on the desk saying, "We beat them the first week. It needs to matter." I guarantee you they would be. But then again, that's human nature. We're always going to fight for what we think is good. Because honestly, probably if I'm me as a Miami fan, I would be like, well, no, it should be about what we've done so far. We did this. We beat Texas A&M and everything. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I said our only losses are two great teams and everything like that, but we won everything else. But also, what helps us if these situations were flipped would be that we would be in the ACC and we'd be probably playing for ACC championship if the roles were reversed. But the Notre Dame does not have this. And that's really the big problem. And that's problem also I get with Texas kind of taking shots and Alabama kind of taking shots at Miami. Miami's not really a problem. Miami's playing in a conference. Your problem, and the reason why you're actually kind of getting pushed out here is because Notre Dame doesn't have that problem. Notre Dame doesn't have to risk anything. Miami does by playing an ACC schedule. Y'all do because y'all play an SEC schedule. Y'all have to risk everything. Notre Dame basically only has to win 9 or 10 games. They're going to be in contention for a BCS championship, a BCS spot, a playoff spot every year. And this has been the problem for years, and no one has ever said anything because until it affects them. But even then, they don't want to say anything. They know who they want to take a shot at. DU. They want to take a shot at DU. But I will get more into that a little bit later. So now let's get into the comparison category when it comes to it. Because basically, that's what we want to do now. We want to compare where the teams are at now. Okay, let's do that. I'm going to break this down as far as what I think right now is the college football playoff race. Let's say, for argument's sake, that Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Oregon, and Texas A&M are locks. Absolute 100% locks in. Nothing that happens this weekend is going to change the fact that these 7 teams have their spots. So then, for argument's sake, right now, based on where they were ranked last week, this may change tonight or where they are ranked now because we don't know what's going to happen. But let's add Oklahoma and Alabama to that mix. It's probably 85 to 95% locks. Because one, even if Alabama doesn't win the SEC championship, I find it very hard to believe that they're going to leave the SEC runner up there, and then that's definitely going to give a spot to Oklahoma because Oklahoma beat Alabama. So because head to head only matters when it's not Miami, but we'll get to that anyway. So as 10-win SEC winners with tough schedules, I know they're going to be another 10-win SEC. I'm going to speak about it a little bit, but we'll get to that. That leaves 3 spots, 2 of which are going to go to either 2 group of 5s or ACC champion. And ACC champion, the OAA is right now, the only way it's ACC champion is if Virginia wins. If not, it's going to be 2 group of 5s, and ACC is going to get left out. So basically what you have right now, and some people are going to argue with me and say that Notre Dame is already in. I'm not going to say that because of what happened here. But for argument's sake, so basically right now you have Notre Dame, Miami, Texas, and Vanderbilt fighting for 1 spot. Now, some people are going to say, what about BYU? BYU is in the Big 12 championship game. And BYU, if they win, this argument's null and void because they're going to take up a spot and kick out all those teams, in my opinion. So that's why I'm not going to really argue about BYU because this is really in my opinion, this is the only way BYU gets in. BYU has to beat Texas Tech to get in. I don't think BYU has enough on its schedule. Their best win is going to be against Utah. But if they win, of course, they just clinch a spot because they're conference champion. They don't have enough against Miami. In reality, they don't have enough against Notre Dame. They've been behind Notre Dame the entire time. They don't have enough against Alabama or Oklahoma. They've been behind these teams the entire time, even though they have one less loss. So that's the only way they get in is if they beat Texas Tech. So, but then again, like I said, if they do that, all this is out the way, and this won't even matter. But we'll see what happens. So there are other things to be said about Oklahoma and Alabama, and I will include them as it goes. But let's go for that. So let's talk about the first team off, and then whether I like to admit it or not, the first team off is going to be Notre Dame. So Notre Dame's most compelling argument is the games they've lost. So no, it's not some. As what a lot of people have been saying, it's the eye test. It's how they looked. It's not. No, it's really not as much as they've looked good because people can say that, but the truth is, the team also struggled against a 1-8 Boston College team. So if we're gonna be real about that, it's not so much what they've looked like. UNC and Pitt are their best wins. That's it. The other participants in the playoffs also these are teams that the other participants in the playoffs can say they've beaten as well. So the schedule includes teams that have. This is another thing about this. Their schedule has 3 of the Power 4 teams of the 3. Sorry, they have 3 of the Power 4 last place teams on their schedule: Arkansas, Boston College, and Purdue. All of which combined for 1 conference win, which Boston College got in the last week of the season against another team that they destroyed, Syracuse. So really what it comes down to, 4 of their opponents literally were just awful. Absolutely awful. That's 4 wins right there. That's 6 wins I've already talked about right there, USC and Pitt. And these 4 teams that were just absolutely awful. So right there, that kind of shows you the kind of, murderer's row they really face on their schedule. Now, their strength of schedule is higher than Miami's, but really what boosts it up is the fact that they have Texas A&M and Miami on their strength of schedule. So this is what is kind of, when it comes to Notre Dame, what's killing me. The most compelling thing to them is the games that they've lost, and that's what the committee has talked about. That's what all these other teams have talked about. It's like, yeah, we played better teams. We've only lost to ranked teams. We've only done this. We've only done that, even though they've only won against 2 ranked teams, and Pittsburgh probably will not be ranked after this. Who knows? But we'll talk about that a little bit later in the Miami part of it too. So the thing is, you're saying that the best part of your schedule is the 2 teams that you've lost to. Okay. So Miami and Texas A&M being the best part of your schedule, but you're disparaging Miami because you think you're better than them, but you've already lost to them, and that's the best part of your argument? Make that make sense. Make that make sense to me. How is the best part of your argument is that you lost to a team that you're trying to say that you're better than, but that team does not deserve to be over you in the college football playoff when you have the same exact record, face most of the same opponents. And the only team that Notre Dame beat better than the teams that the common opponents that they have was Syracuse. And Syracuse at that point, I think we all can agree, was laying down last week to give up 70 points and then lose to an only team that had not won an ACC game this week. I don't know what Fran Brown got going on up there in Syracuse. I know that he lost his quarterback, so it kind of lost the juice that was going on, but that's what happened. If you look at the other three games, the other three common opponents, NC State gave Notre Dame hell for a good point, but Notre Dame got away from them, you know, distanced themselves to win 36-7. Miami won 41-7, and it was never in doubt. Miami was up 24-0 before NC State even blinked. So, okay, let's go to Stanford. Now Miami slept through the first half of Stanford. It was 7-7 at halftime. Miami ended up winning 42-7 by just absolutely dominating the second half. So Notre Dame at the halftime was up 35-3 against Stanford. They kind of took their foot off the gas, as some would say, because that's different. But they win 49-20. So basically, Miami gave up less points and only scored one less touchdown. And then whatever you want to say, Miami also took its foot off the gas at the second point too. And then there's Pittsburgh, the only ranked team that both teams shared. Now Notre Dame jumped up on them, was up like 14-0 with them, but ended up winning 37-15. So Miami, when they played Pittsburgh, had a bit of a sleepy start, yes, to it. Pittsburgh was able to win 7-3, and then that was the last thing that they played. Miami went on a 35-0 run, won a 38-7, and absolutely dominated the game. Pittsburgh was not able to get anything going offensively, was not able to get anything going defensively. Miami absolutely dominated the game. Even turned the ball over once in the red zone, so it could have been a lot worse. Now Miami was content to stay at 31-7, but Pat Narduzzi called a timeout trying to get the ball back so he could get some more points on the board. I was like, oh, that's how you want to play it? That's how they scored the last touchdown, which Sarkisian pointed out in his one of his talks today. Which, look, the teams are going to badmouth each other, but I really think Texas and Alabama are taking the shots at the wrong person. But, that's me. So, sorry, y'all. Business to be taken care of as well. So, when it comes down to it, the thing is, when it comes to their biggest argument, the biggest thing they said that they were a better team and they were playing better than Miami was. Okay, you put Miami in the same situation in a ranked matchup against a team that needs it, that basically is more desperate. Because Pittsburgh did not approach, I'll say this, Pittsburgh did not approach Notre Dame's game the way I guarantee you they approached the game against Miami. Because this game, if Pittsburgh wins this game, Pittsburgh is going to the ACC championship. If Pittsburgh wins this game, Pittsburgh is going to the ACC championship. Winning against Notre Dame only kind of gets you clout, basically, but it wasn't going to get them because they were so far down in the rankings. It wasn't going to get them into the at-large conversation. Not with other teams like Miami being ahead of them. So I guarantee you, Notre Dame, like they were approaching this differently, and then Miami just shut the door on them, absolutely destroyed them, holding them to their season-long points, yards, and everything else. So when you put these on the same hand, the whole point that they are is like, who's better now? It's obvious to me that Miami right now is playing better than even Notre Dame is playing. And Notre Dame, I have to admit, is playing amazingly at this point. But Miami, in the same situation, in the same stadium, in a way that even with Miami players, they're not used to playing in those type of conditions, beat a team that was ranked at the same ranking as well, more handily than they did. So let's get down to the second team of this conversation, which is Miami. Miami's big argument is the games that they've won games on the field, just like any other contender. Like another contender here that I'll talk about, but I'll get to them later. First off, Miami beat Notre Dame. I know I've already said this, but there's no other word for it. Just because people want to ignore it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It did. Both teams were healthy. Well, actually, Miami lost a starting running back one series into the game, but I digress because he ended up not being the starting running back for the season. But if you watch the game, there are a couple facts that became clear. Miami was built to win this game in the trenches, where it's supposed to be Notre Dame's strength was supposed to be the trenches, but Miami was stronger and better than it on both lines of scrimmage. So I guarantee you that both Jeremiah Love and CJ Carr still have nightmares about this game. It's Jeremiah Love's worst game of the season, only 33 yards and 10 carries. Now, one thing I will say, Notre Dame probably should have found a way to get him the ball more, but I understand why they didn't, because he wasn't effective when he was getting the ball. And now there are a few drives that they were able to use the other running back, whose name I don't even remember right now. I'm not even going to lie, because Jeremiah Love is the best player on this team. And there are a couple times they were able to get Malachi Fields going on the outside as well. But until the fourth quarter, Notre Dame was not in this game. Miami had dominated this game. Now Miami got conservative, and Miami did not give up the kill shot, which I think one thing that Miami learned down the stretch of the season, you got to keep going. Because I think if Miami would have kept going, we would not be having this conversation. And I think that's one thing that Notre Dame is also bringing about. Notre Dame was able to come back and tie this game. Now, Notre Dame ties this game. Miami marches down the field methodically, gets a pass interference call that's absolutely the right call this time. It stalls out a little bit because they run it because they get conservative because they got to where they wanted to go. They get the field goal. In my opinion, as a fan, I'm sweating because I felt like they left too much time on the clock. And I felt that if this Notre Dame team was better, that they would have gone down the field because they were hot at the time. They would have gone down the field and scored. But that's not what happened. Miami's dominance at the line of scrimmage took over this game. Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Baines shut the door on this game. A sack, intentional grounding, incomplete pass, one first down, I think, then another, and then 3 sacks to end the game. Miami was absolutely, and then the clock ran out before they were able to get a Hail Mary attempt. But then the clock ran out because they already got it. Miami absolutely dominated this game. And if you don't believe me, check out the ACC Network this weekend because the ACC Network is going to be playing the game on loop basically on Friday and Saturday just to show what's up. So this is the thing. Miami does well what Notre Dame wants to do well. They establish the line of scrimmage, and they get to you, and they force you into passing it more so. And then the thing is, Miami doesn't give up a lot of big plays. Now, Miami gave up a couple big plays to Pittsburgh. Miami gave up a couple big plays in this game to Notre Dame, but that's not what they usually do. I think the main difference between these two teams, and I know there are a lot of it, I will say this, I think Notre Dame is a little bit more explosive than Miami is, but Miami has a much better defense than I think Notre Dame is. Miami's not going to let up 41 points to Texas A&M. They're just not. Even in the games that they lost, they gave up one of their lowest scores and lowest yardage totals. The game to SMU, they gave up going into overtime. They given up 3 yards rushing in that entire game. 3 yards rushing. This is one of the best rushing units in the nation when it comes to stopping the run. And if I'm not mistaken, Notre Dame's best player is Jeremiah Love, and his worst game of the season is against Miami. I think these things have to be taken into consideration when you're talking about the entire body of work. If you're saying that this team is better than them, okay, so who forced them into their worst offensive output in the season? Miami. So, let's talk about a couple other things. Alabama played a common opponent with Miami. When it comes down to it, they played against Florida State. Alabama lost by 2 touchdowns to Florida State. And if you watch the Florida State game, and I was there, Miami dominated the game. Now, this is another game that Miami let them into it. But Miami is one of the 5 teams in all of SBS that have 8 wins of 17 or more. They led by 10, but it's just in all 10 of their wins, 11 of their 12 games. This team is a lot more dominant than I think people are giving them credit for because it doesn't look like it is, and because, honestly, it's Miami. And this Florida State game is pivotal because I think it starts that 4-game stretch where Miami plays its worst football of the season until about the second half of the Syracuse game when they start playing their best ball of the season. And they end strong. Because basically they won the last 4 games by an average of 30 points per game. If that's not consistency, I don't know what is. You beat Pittsburgh, like I said, a ranked team by 31. You beat a Virginia Tech team who was a ranked team by 17. Even though everybody was saying, oh, they got scared. Miami led for double digits for 45 minutes in that game. Absolutely blasted NC State. NC State has beaten Virginia. NC State beat Louisville. NC State gave Notre Dame its best game until they struggled against Boston College. NC State is not something to be played with, but yet Miami made C.J. Bailey, who was a very good quarterback, look like a freshman in this game. Really, the only person to do. And now Syracuse gave Miami a game for a half, and then Miami opened up his playbook and absolutely bashed him by 28. This team is dominant, and they learned a conservative lesson. And then there's also Texas, who I'm about to talk about, but Texas also has a common opponent with them, Florida. Texas lost to Florida. Miami destroyed Florida by 19. So, and then Texas went on to beat Oklahoma. So, like I said, I promise this all goes somewhere. So let's talk about Texas. Texas actually has a similar but less strong argument in Miami. It's all about games. It won games on the field. It played games on the field. It's by far the best opponent to Ohio State, which is one of its biggest arguments. They beat Oklahoma and Vanderbilt and have the biggest win amongst this group by taking down number 3 Texas A&M. Now, Texas, its biggest issue is its 3 losses, and also in 2 of its wins, it did not look good. The games against Kentucky and Mississippi State, which are not good teams. Like I said, Kentucky got boat raced by Louisville the other day, 41-0, and Mississippi State, I think, only won one SEC game. It was the only other SEC loss to Florida. Florida only won 2 SEC games there against Mississippi State and Texas. That's not a good look for Texas. I mean, Texas struggled with both these teams. Now, that being said, I think losing to Florida definitely built them up into pummeling Oklahoma. And I think that is a legitimate argument. And they beat Vanderbilt, another team I'm about to talk about as well. So they kind of have that head-to-head there. But, this argument is about playing games on the field, which is a similar one to it. They feel like they're being punished because they scheduled Ohio State. They're not being punished because they scheduled Ohio State. That's a ballsy move. You're being punished because you lost to Florida. And it's a 4-1 team. That's why you're being punished. That's really what it comes down to it. And also, when you play Georgia, which is a legitimate college football playoff, you won one game against a legitimate college football playoff opponent, and you lost 2 against 2 of them. And really were outcoached and manhandled by that Georgia team. Kirby Smart kind of coached circles around Steve Sarkisian at that point. It was kind of embarrassing. So then we move on to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt has a Cinderella season, the best season in school history, a Heisman candidate. But in reality, there's not much else to be said about Vanderbilt's season. They can claim a couple ranked wins, but those ranked wins are long from being ranked now. I think it's South Carolina and Missouri. And then they can, of course, the Tennessee game. I'll get into that a little bit as well. But South Carolina, I think that was their last game as a ranked person. I know they knocked out Lenore Sellers in that game and kind of started their downward spiral. But South Carolina, I think, only won one SEC game from the rest of the way, which unfortunately is just not going to help. Yeah, they gave Texas A&M all they could handle, but whatever. Beat Missouri, they knocked out Missouri's quarterback halfway through that game. It was a great game and everything, but Vanderbilt lost to Texas. They lost to Alabama. I think if Vanderbilt had found a way to win that game and against Alabama, we'd be having a whole different conversation. But we're not, and they didn't. So yes, they beat Tennessee, but Tennessee lost 4 games this year. Tennessee, we all knew was not going to be as good as last year because of what happened with them losing Nico. Even though I think privately that was best for the program. You can't give in to one player with it like this, and I think that's going to help them in the long run. We knew this was going to be an off year for them. So, as great as this is, as great as the story that it is, and they're going to have a Heisman candidate, in my opinion, Daniel Pavia, there's not much else to be said about Vanderbilt. When you have a head-to-head disadvantage against Texas, and Texas has one more loss, in my opinion, I think Texas should be ahead of Vanderbilt. That's just my opinion when it comes to that. And so, because Texas actually played a tough outside SEC Power 4 game. I don't even think Vanderbilt had a tough SEC schedule. I think they had one of the softer ones, in my opinion. So, it is what it is. So now we'll talk about the arguments for Oklahoma and Alabama here. Oklahoma beat Alabama. Alabama beat Georgia. They have the best, and those, in my opinion, those are kind of the best wins outside of Texas A&M win for Texas. So for me, I don't see how the committee is going to let them out. Let's be real. When it comes to it, they're not gonna leave out SEC runner up. That's something catastrophic happens to Ty Simpson, and that's why they lose, or voodoo magic or something like that. But let's be real too. The voodoo magic that Bama has over Georgia, it wouldn't surprise me if they won. And in that case, Oklahoma would definitely be in, and Georgia's not in. Georgia's already clinched their spot. They're definitely in. 11 wins the SEC, they're in. So because of that, at head-to-head, it just brings me to my final point when it comes to it. The most glaring thing that Miami has to blame: bias. Yes, the most glaring thing Miami has to blame is bias. Yes, I'm sure a lot of you non-Miami fans are going to come across this and y'all saw this coming. You saw this coming on my way because that's what Miami fans are always talking about: bias this, bias that, bias this, bias that. But I have proof, and I already alluded to it. The very first ranking, every single head-to-head matchup that happened between teams with similar records was taken into account, except Miami's, and Notre Dame's. And before you said, "Oh, Miami was 9 spots behind," I've already said Miami was grossly underrated, and you can tell by how much they tried. They did, but by the way, they course corrected. And what I'm saying is that they moved them up 3 spots, even though they beat a team that they should have in Syracuse, and then they moved them up 2 spots, even though they beat a team that they should have in NC State, and then still moved them up a spot, even though there are a lot of people saying that Miami didn't beat Virginia Tech the way they should have in the next one. So they moved up from 18 to 12 by doing what they were supposed to do, while the other teams kind of stayed stagnant. No other team, wasn't really any big movement here between it. Texas moved back because they lost, but everyone else kind of moved in step with what was going on, except for Miami. Miami has made the biggest move from the first rankings to the last one, and it's because they knew they grossly underrated them to begin the rankings. So. And then you're asking, as the last couple rankings, when it comes to them closer and closer to Notre Dame. And so they brought them closer and closer to Notre Dame to now the point that they are in the same cluster, or at least about to be. So now you're saying, no, that can't be possible. Miami and Notre Dame could not have been the only head-to-head that was not taken into account. Well, Alabama over Georgia. Texas Tech over BYU. BYU over Utah. Texas over Oklahoma. Georgia over Ole Miss. Virginia over Louisville, Louisville over Miami. All of them, the only record that wasn't identical was Utah and BYU's, because BYU had one less loss than Utah did. That's bias. No matter which way that you put it, that is bias. And let's be real, why was Notre Dame so high to begin with? The only signature win at that point was a USC team that had not been ranked higher than 20th and had a bad loss to an Illinois team that, while had been ranked, lost by 50 to Indiana. Lost by 50 to Indiana. And I've talked to a couple USC fans since that. They say the big thing that has hurt them this season is that they lost to Illinois. And I got to be real with you. It's the big thing that's hurt them this season. They lost to Illinois, who got a 50 burger. Got beat by 50 points by Indiana. I cannot stress that enough. That's one of the most embarrassing losses in the entire season. You would say, well, no. Nothing. Miami lost their games by a combined 9 points to two teams that won 8 games. Illinois won 7 games and got destroyed by 50. Destroyed by 50 to Indiana. And so, but Indiana's good. Look, Indiana has probably one of the best wins. But before Texas A&M win, I'll say Indiana has the best win by going into Eugene and beating Oregon. But other than that, Indiana's about to play their best game when they play number 1, and then it's number 2. The least look forward to number 1 versus number 2 matchup I've ever seen in Ohio State and Indiana this week. Then we'll learn more about them then, because we haven't really been able to learn more about them since. It's like you can say, oh, they had guts when they played Penn State, but the thing is, Penn State didn't have their coach, and Penn State's a whole nother subject for the end of the year podcast that we will have. But I will say this too when it comes to it. Like I said, it was bias. No matter which way that you say. Because first off, why was Notre Dame so high? Only signature win, like I said, was USC at this point. I'm sorry for rambling. Just got to get it up. Notre Dame should have been closer to Miami in those polls. And the committee let the AP poll, in my opinion, influence it. Josh Pate made this point 3 weeks ago. And it was obvious because it was the same exact order as the AP poll. Like I said, first finger is pointed in Miami's way, because Miami should not have lost to these teams. Like, I will keep saying that until the end of the season. And when Miami inevitably misses out on a playoff spot, that's the first thing I will say. I promise you that. But the second, third, fourth, and fifth thing I will talk about is the bias that has happened and the unfairness that it will. And so I'm hoping that the committee commits to what they have said, and the thing that they've always said has been the most thing that they will let it play out on the field. But for me, not letting these things play out on the field and letting your bias get into it is devastating. It's also the way that Miami is talked about. I feel like Miami's losses and flaws are talked a lot more about than under these teams. These teams that I just talked about, these 4 teams I talked about, Notre Dame, Miami, Texas, Vanderbilt, they're not perfect teams. Not by any means. If they were, they'd be more so we talked about on the Ohio State side. But that's the thing. I don't think there's a perfect team out there. I think Ohio State probably has got as close as you can get because their defense is so good. But I don't really know that much about Ohio State yet. I feel like they were challenged by Texas. I feel like they were challenged a little bit by Michigan. I feel like, well, maybe we'll see how. Maybe they're challenged by Indiana, but man, I gotta feel like they have such a just an athletic mismatch with Indiana. I'm not sure if we're even going to see if they're tested then. I feel like the playoffs is going to be the first time the Ohio State's tested, and that may not be the best thing for Ohio State. All these teams have flaws. Alabama can't run the ball. Georgia, Georgia also has issues running the ball. Oregon, lacks some of that. Oregon kind of lacks some of that pizzazz, but they've been playing a lot better as the season has gone on. They're going to be dangerous. Texas Tech, I think it's more so. It's like who has Texas Tech played, but I mean they have a great defense as well. Ole Miss has just lost their whole offensive staff. Who knows about that? And then, they also lost to Georgia. I mean, Indiana. What do we really know about them? But all these teams have faced every challenge toward them, and they've rise to the occasion, including Miami. Notre Dame, they haven't played. I just kind of showed y'all how much they really haven't played anybody besides the first two teams that they played, and they lost to them. Texas A&M, we saw some of their flaws against Texas. When it comes down to it, lack of offensive cohesion a little bit, are susceptible to allowing the big play a little bit of time. I think they kind of looked ahead a little bit when it came to Texas. Didn't take them as serious as they need to. Probably the best thing for them is losing to Texas because it's going to refocus them, and they can focus on what they need to do to get into the playoff. So none of these teams are perfect. None of these are the 0-1 Hurricanes or even the 19 LSU Tigers or hell, even 13 or 13 Seminoles or 0-8 Gators or any of the Alabama teams. None of these teams are, in my opinion. So why are we talking about Miami's losses as compared to Notre Dame's losses more so? That's another thing too. When did better losses become a metric? That's not what we talked about last year. It was the wins. No one talked about Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois last year. Not once. No one talked about Ohio State losing to Oregon and Michigan last year, except the fact that it knocked them out of the Big Ten championship game. Like, for me, that's one thing it brought out to what it reminded me of, again, is that the goalpost seems to change when Miami is involved. And this is, as a Miami fan, maybe I am completely wrong. Maybe I am completely out of left field when it comes to it. But I'll say this. Last year, watching, and Miami deserved not to make the playoff last year. I'll say this. I said this on this program. Miami had it in front of them. Miami should have went undefeated last year too. But they screwed the pooch on there. But when the committee put in that last week with championship week, when that committee put in a 9-3 Alabama team and ranked them ahead of Miami after they had struggled against a 4-win Auburn team, lost to a 6-win Oklahoma team, and they said that they finished the season better than Miami did. I had to look like, no, they didn't. They finished the season the same as Miami did. They had lost 2 of their last 4 games. Miami had lost 2 of their last 4 games. It was laughable. But what it showed me is that Alabama has more respectable recent history. So for me, I think you have to tell the truth when it comes down to it. Say it how it is. You give Alabama the benefit of the doubt. You don't trust Miami. You don't give Miami the benefit of the doubt. Now, luckily, Championship Saturday went bonkers, and justice was served on that end, and Alabama didn't make it because I don't feel Alabama deserved to make it. Like I said, I didn't feel Miami deserved to make it either. I'm not going to lie about that. Miami should have been an ACC championship game, and they should have been able to play their way in. But that being said, it just feels like the knife fell right in Miami's heart and no one else's. And I'm starting to see it here happen again. It feels like the knife is going to fall. But where it's trending, where it's landing, where it's being targeted at by the committee, by ESPN, by all these other pundits, by everyone who's saying all these things and saying that week 1 shouldn't matter. It should be about now. Even though they're not really taking now into accountability, because if they were, they would see that Miami is actually playing the best ball in the country right now. They're playing just as well as anybody else. They have just as many 17-point wins as Ohio State, just as many as Indiana, just as many as any other team in the country. They led by double digits in 11 of their 12 games this year. Their 2 games they've lost by a combined 9 points to teams that are 8-4 and were in contention for an ACC championship game. They played. They have no. There's no team on their schedule that are bad as 4 of the worst opponents that Notre Dame has, except for the one common bad opponent that they have, Syracuse. But like I said, it's trending to see that it's going to go where it always goes. That knife is going to go into Hurricanes' hearts. So I guess we'll see what happens. Hopefully, I am wrong. Hopefully, I am just being a hurt Miami fan. Hopefully, what I've talked about for the past hour is just me rambling on and not being right. But the thing is, after realizing and looking at everything that's happened and the way that it's been trending and how everyone is talking about it, like how have the dentists approached it, I don't see how Miami is going to be ahead of Notre Dame tonight in the CFP rankings, even though they damn well should be. And so, I guess we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. Go Canes! And this has been a mini podcast with your boy MusiqNerd. Like I said, we will be back next week with the end of season podcast to see what ends up happening. Good night, Hurricanes fans. Let's hope for the best. Love you guys. Peace.